Dr. Elara Mace stared at the crimson stone slab, her heart racing as the last of the dirt was cleared away, revealing the artifact in its full eerie glory. It sat in a cavern beneath Earth's surface, hidden for millennia, its secrets untold. The light from her helmet illuminated the jagged edges of the artifact, casting long shadows across the stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of ancient dust, and the oppressive silence seemed to hum with a life of its own. She reached out, trembling, unable to tear her gaze away from the deep crimson glow that emanated from within the slab. Her fingers brushed against its surface, and a jolt of energy surged up her arm, a shock so powerful it made her vision blur. She gasped and pulled back, her breath quickening. Her pulse thudded in her ears as a strange warmth flooded her chest. "What the hell was that?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The team behind her was silent, the rest of the crew uneasy but unsure what to make of the moment. Elara glanced at her lead technician, Marcus, who stood off to the side, his eyes wide behind his visor. "Did you feel that?" she asked. Marcus nodded, his voice shaky. "I thought it was just static, but that felt like it was alive." Before Elara could respond, a low hum filled the cavern, so deep it vibrated through her bones. The slab trembled, and the artifact's glow intensified, pulsing rhythmically as though responding to her touch. A sudden wind swept through the chamber, though the air was still and stagnant just moments before. "Okay, something's definitely wrong," Elara said, her voice firm despite the growing sense of dread. She quickly motioned for the crew to step back, but they hesitated. She could see the flicker of panic in their eyes. As the hum grew louder, it became impossible to ignore the sensation that they weren't alone in the chamber. "Everyone back," Elara ordered, her voice commanding. "Get to the extraction point. Now." The team scrambled to follow her instructions, but just as they turned to leave, the cavern shuddered violently. The ground beneath their feet cracked open, sending rocks tumbling into the abyss below. Elara steadied herself against the sudden quake, her heart in her throat. Then the artifact began to glow brighter, its pulse matching the beat of her own heart. She could feel it, its energy pouring through the walls, into the very air she breathed. In that moment, everything changed. Through the vibrations, she heard a voice, soft at first, then clearer, its tone alien but strangely familiar. It resonated in her mind, its words forming with chilling clarity. "You have awakened me." Elara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice echoed inside her head, as though it were both far away and yet right beside her. She staggered back, her hands shaking, trying to process what was happening. "What is that?" Marcus asked, his voice a whisper of awe and fear. The cavern trembled again, more violently this time, as if the artifact were responding to the question. Elara felt an overwhelming pressure build within the chamber, the air growing thick with energy, suffocating her. Her mind raced. Was this an ancient alien technology? No one had ever predicted anything like this. No records, no research, no warning of what might be buried beneath Earth. She had only uncovered fragments of old legends, whispers of a power so vast that even the stars would tremble in its wake. As she took a cautious step forward, the voice spoke again, and this time it was louder, clearer, a command. "The revolution begins." A chill ran down her spine. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that shook her to the core. The artifact wasn't just a relic, it was a key, a beacon, a catalyst. And Earth had just become its unwilling focal point. The hum continued to grow louder, and the floor beneath them cracked wide open. Panic set in, and Elara's team ran for their lives, scrambling to escape the collapsing cavern. But Elara stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the glowing crimson stone. The revolution had begun. The next few days felt like a blur to Dr. Elara Mace. After the disaster at the excavation site, Earth's top security forces had cordoned off the entire region, sealing it under layers of secrecy. The artifact was removed, but no one outside the highest levels of government knew exactly what had been discovered. The planet was on edge, tensions rising as strange disturbances across the world seemed to echo the event in the cavern. Electronic systems across the globe began malfunctioning sporadically. Communications dropped out for hours, satellites flickered in and out of orbit, and power grids went haywire. Alara was escorted into a hidden facility beneath the sprawling complex of Earth's highest command center, known only to a select few. She felt the weight of what she had uncovered hanging over her like a shadow, but nothing could prepare her for what was coming next. The facility was sterile, lined with cold steel and glass, as though it were designed to prevent any hint of warmth. At the center of the room was the artifact, now encased in a transparent cylinder that shimmered faintly with crimson energy. Alara stared at it, entranced yet horrified. The slab from the cavern had been carved into a perfect sphere, but the power radiating from it was still unsettlingly palpable. She could feel it in her bones, the subtle pulse of its energy, as though it were alive, waiting. "Dr. Mace," came a deep voice from behind her. She turned to find General Cal Voss, Earth's military leader, standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. His uniform was pristine, but his eyes held a sharpness that spoke of years spent facing the impossible. He didn't wait for her to speak. "This is your mess," he said, his tone blunt. "What exactly did we uncover, and how do we stop it?" Alara sighed, her mind racing. "I'm not entirely sure, but this isn't just an artifact. It's a weapon, and it's connected to something far larger than us. The energy it's releasing isn't just random, it's responding to something." Voss crossed his arms, clearly frustrated. "What does that mean? We don't have the luxury of time, Dr. Mace. You've seen the reports. The first wave of disruptions was only the beginning. We're getting signals from the Xenon Dominion. They know we have something, and they're coming for it." Alara's stomach twisted. The Xenon Dominion was one of the most powerful and ruthless empires in the galaxy, and their interest in the artifact could only mean trouble. She had heard rumors about the Dominion's insatiable thirst for power, how they would stop at nothing to control anything they deemed important. If they learned what Earth had found, the consequences would be disastrous. "Have we made contact with them?" Alara asked. Voss' expression hardened. "We tried. They're demanding access to the artifact, or they'll destroy us. They've already launched a fleet toward Earth's orbit." A cold shiver ran down Alara's spine. The Dominion wasn't known for its diplomacy. They didn't negotiate. They conquered. "And what are we doing in response?" she asked, a touch of panic creeping into her voice. "Earth's forces are mobilizing," Voss said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. "But we have nothing that can match their technology. We're outgunned and outclassed in almost every respect." "Except for the artifact," Alara said softly, turning her gaze back to the encased relic. "Exactly." Voss took a step closer, his voice lowering. "Which brings me to my next point. I need you to work with us, Dr. Mace. We need to understand this thing. Fast. And if we can't control it, we destroy it. But if we can, we might just have a chance." Alara felt a weight settle in her chest. She had spent years studying alien technology, but nothing had ever prepared her for this. This was no simple weapon. It was something ancient, something far beyond human comprehension. And yet, she could feel its power pulling her in, a strange force calling her to unlock its secrets. Before she could respond, a low hum vibrated through the room, and the artifact pulsed brightly. Everyone in the room froze. The hum deepened into a resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the floor. Alara's breath caught. "It's reacting to something out there." "That's not good," Voss muttered, his expression darkening. "Get ready, Dr. Mace. We're about to find out just how deep this rabbit hole goes." Suddenly, the entire room seemed to shudder, the hum growing louder, as if the artifact were calling out to something or someone. Alara's mind raced. The Xenon Dominion was no longer just a threat. It was now a race against time. The artifact was stirring, and its power was growing. The hum from the artifact didn't stop. If anything, it intensified, its vibrations now reverberating through the very bones of the facility. Ilara stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the glowing orb inside the containment chamber, as the air around her seemed to grow heavier. It was as though the entire world had shifted, and she was standing at the precipice of something monumental. General Voss, who had been pacing nervously, stopped abruptly, his face taut with tension. "This isn't just a call," he muttered, his voice low. "This is a signal." Before Ilara could respond, the lights in the room flickered. A deep, rumbling sound echoed from the atmosphere outside, and the ground trembled slightly beneath their feet. "Incoming," Voss said, his voice steely with resolve. "Get to your stations. Now." The suddenness of it all jolted Ilara into motion. She rushed to the central control panel, her hands flying over the controls as she accessed the satellite surveillance network. The feed was live, showing Earth's orbit and the surrounding sectors. But what she saw made her blood run cold. A massive fleet, an armada, was heading straight for Earth. The Xenon Dominion had arrived. "How long do we have?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of panic. 5 minutes, maybe less, one of the techs replied, his face pale as he stared at the screen. "They're moving fast." Voss didn't hesitate. He was already moving, barking orders to the crew, his military precision evident. "Prepare the defenses," he commanded. "Activate all orbital weaponry. Earth's first line of defense will buy us time, but this is only the beginning. I'll take the artifact." "What?" Ilara interrupted, horrified. "No, General, you can't." "Don't argue," Voss snapped. "The artifact may be the key to survival. We need to control it before they do. You're with me." Reluctantly, Ilara nodded, her mind whirling. The artifact wasn't just a weapon, it was a force. But if the Xenon Dominion got their hands on it, it would be the end of humanity. There was no question. Voss led the way, and the team scrambled to secure the artifact for transport. As they moved through the facility's secure hallways, the tension was palpable, every footstep echoing in the thick silence. They reached the hangar bay, where a sleek transport ship awaited them. But as they boarded, a loud, screeching alarm blared through the complex, signaling that the first wave of the Dominion's fleet had entered Earth's orbit. "We're running out of time," Ilara muttered, glancing at Voss. "We don't even know how to control it." Voss met her gaze, his expression hard. "We'll learn fast. Earth's survival depends on it." As the ship ascended through Earth's atmosphere, Ilara's thoughts raced. The artifact was growing more powerful with each passing second, and she could feel its influence, tugging at her mind like a magnet. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a living thing, aware of its surroundings, aware of them. The thought unsettled her, but there was no time to dwell on it. The ship broke free of the atmosphere and entered the cold expanse of space, the enormity of the situation hitting Ilara in full force. The Xenon fleet loomed ahead, a dark mass of ships, each one bristling with weapons designed to bring entire worlds to their knees. Their leader, Emperor Talon, was known for his merciless tactics, and Ilara had no doubt he would stop at nothing to claim the artifact. "Prepare for battle," Voss ordered, as the ship powered up, its weapon systems primed. Ilara glanced at the artifact, still contained within its protective shell, but its energy was clearly pulsing, alive with potential. She wasn't sure whether to feel hope or terror. Would the artifact respond to their command, or would it betray them, just as the Xenon forces closed in? "Here we go," Voss muttered under his breath, as the ship's guns locked onto the approaching fleet. Before Ilara could answer, the first barrage of fire from the Xenon ships erupted in the distance, streaking through the blackness of space toward Earth's orbit. The shockwave rattled their ship, sending it lurching forward. Voss gritted his teeth. Engage? Earth's defense systems fired back, but they were outmatched. As the battle unfolded in space, Alara could see the destruction unfolding on the screen. Massive explosions lit up the dark expanse as Earth's first line of defense crumbled under the Dominion's overwhelming firepower. But Alara was focused on something else, on the artifact. Its energy was building, gathering strength like a storm on the horizon. She felt it. Something was about to break. "Now, General," she said urgently, "it's time." Voss nodded sharply, and the transport ship's engines roared as it surged forward into the chaos of battle. The artifact pulsed once again, its glow brighter than ever. And then, as if in answer to an ancient call, the ship's systems came to life, aligning with the artifact's energy in an overwhelming surge of power. The revolution was about to begin. The battle between Earth and the Xenon Dominion had escalated quickly. In the vastness of space, amidst explosions and flashing weapons, Alara Mace could feel the air around her charge with an unnatural energy. The artifact, now securely aboard the transport ship, pulsed with a raw, uncontained power. Every second, it grew stronger, its deep crimson glow cutting through the chaos like a beacon. "Hold on," Voss shouted, gripping the controls as the ship rocked under the impact of enemy fire. The transport's shields flickered, struggling to maintain integrity as Xenon warships launched another barrage of missiles, their sleek black forms twisting through the void toward them. Alara's hands were locked on the artifact's containment module, but she wasn't sure whether it was the ship's engine hum or the artifact itself that rattled her bones. The artifact seemed to be calling to her, its strange energy threading through her very mind. A whisper in the back of her consciousness, "We are the same." "What's happening?" she asked, barely able to hear her own voice over the alarms blaring in the ship. The general, eyes fixed on the incoming Xenon fleet, didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for the comm system, his voice steady but urgent. "Command, we're moving into range. Activate the experimental weapons system. Target the Lade fleet." "Yes, General," came the reply from Earth's Defense Command, a hint of fear hidden behind the professionalism. They had been readying a new weapon, one powered by the artifact's strange energy, but no one was entirely sure how it would perform. It was a gamble. As the ship surged toward the heart of the Xenon fleet, Alara's breath caught. She didn't know how to control the artifact, didn't know how it worked, but she felt its energy building within her, drawing from the ship, from herself, from the very space around them. It was like a fire, starting small and growing hotter with every passing moment. "General, the artifact." Alara's voice trailed off, her words lost as she gripped the module tighter. The artifact's glow intensified, so bright now that it nearly blinded her. It was happening, she realized. The artifact was opening up to her, unlocking something within her that had remained dormant for years. Something deep inside her mind, something ancient and yet terrifyingly familiar. "I can feel it," she said, more to herself than anyone else. The connection was undeniable now. The artifact and she were linked, as if it had been waiting for her touch, for her presence. "Steady, Dr. Mace," Voss said, though his voice was laced with a mix of caution and desperation. "We're almost there." The Xenon fleet was closing in fast. Alara could see their massive warships, gleaming in the cold void of space, launching hundreds of smaller vessels, fighters, and drones to intercept. The odds were against them, and their defenses were failing. The artifact was their last hope, but Alara wasn't sure if they could truly harness its power in time. Without thinking, she reached out to the artifact, her hand resting gently on the transparent shell. A surge of energy passed through her, and she gasped, her vision going white as the power of the artifact flooded her senses. It wasn't just light, it was pure force, a storm of energy so immense it could shatter worlds. She could feel it bending around her, understanding it, controlling it. With a sudden, terrifying clarity, she knew what had to be done. "General, brace for impact," she shouted, her voice sharp with the certainty she hadn't felt before. "It's time to unleash the catalyst." Voss stared at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before he nodded, his hands moving to the ship's main control panel. "Do it," he said. Alara focused all her attention on the artifact. It was more than just a weapon, it was a conduit, a channel for a power beyond human comprehension. As her mind locked into the artifact's frequency, she felt the ship around her hum with the same energy, as if the very hull was a part of the artifact itself. A blinding light engulfed the ship, and the entire fleet seemed to go still as a massive, concentrated wave of force erupted from the transport ship, tearing through space like a shockwave. The Xenon ships closest to the blast disintegrated, their once imposing forms crumbling into dust. The ships further out struggled to maintain their formations, their shields faltering under the immense power unleashed by the artifact's energy. Alara's hands shook violently as she struggled to maintain control of the power coursing through her, but it was no use. The artifact had no intention of being contained. With a deafening roar, the ship was thrown back, spinning uncontrollably through space. The impact sent Alara crashing against the console, her vision blackening for a moment as the shockwave continued to pulse outward. "Status?" Voss barked, his voice distant. "We've lost control of the ship," came the response from the crew, panic evident in their tone. "But the Xenon fleet, it's disintegrating. The catalyst, it's too much for them." Alara's breath came in ragged gasps as she slowly lifted her head, watching the destruction unfold before her eyes. The artifact's power was still spreading, consuming everything in its path. It had ignited the revolution, and now the stars themselves trembled before its wrath. The revolution had truly begun, and humanity, for the first time, had the upper hand. The light from the artifact faded, but its echoes reverberated through the very fabric of space. Alara's head throbbed, and her body felt like it had been set on fire. Her vision swam in and out of focus as the ship continued to spin, helpless in the chaos that had been unleashed. She could barely hear the frantic voices over the comm system, the constant alarms blaring, and the rumbling of the ship as it lost altitude. "We're going down," someone yelled from the crew, panic evident in their tone. "Controls offline. We need to stabilize, now." Voss, though equally shaken by the power of the catalyst, had regained some composure. "Brace yourselves," he shouted, grabbing the nearest support bar and locking his feet into place. His eyes were fixed on Alara, his expression fierce, determined. "We're not done yet. We need to take control. This isn't over." Alara struggled to focus. The power of the artifact was still throbbing in her veins, its influence overwhelming. But in that chaotic moment, something in her mind clicked. The artifact had responded to her. It had obeyed her command, but it was still alive, still hungry. It had unleashed destruction on a scale they couldn't fathom, but it wasn't done. It wanted more. She grabbed the edge of the console, pulling herself up with shaking arms. "We need to stop it," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Voss took a step toward her, his face grim. "Can we control it? Can you stop the reaction?" Alara looked at the artifact. It pulsed gently in its containment module, but its glow had grown unstable, flickering like a candle in the wind. She reached out again, feeling the deep well of power, but this time it was more like trying to hold back an avalanche with bare hands. The artifact was feeding on the destruction, its hunger insatiable. "We don't have time," she said, panic creeping into her voice. "It's not just the Xenon fleet. It's drawing power from the environment, from the whole system. If we don't shut it down, it could consume everything." Voss didn't hesitate. "What do we need to do?" Alara glanced at the ship's systems, realizing that they were too damaged to make any traditional repairs. The only way to prevent the artifact's energy from spiraling out of control was to recalibrate its power core and sever its connection to the ship's main systems. The problem was that such a procedure would require absolute precision, and she wasn't sure she had the skill or time to make it work. Pull up the emergency override, she said, locking eyes with the ship's chief technician, who was frantically trying to stabilize the remaining systems. We need to isolate the artifact's power source. If we can't, it'll tear us apart. The technician nodded quickly, his face pale. I'm on it, Dr. Mace. The ship's systems flickered, the lights dimming as they struggled to recover from the initial blast. Ilara felt a deep sense of urgency. If they didn't act quickly, the artifact's power would continue to spread. It would consume not just Earth, but every system in its path until there was nothing left. For the first time since the battle had started, Ilara felt like they were fighting not just for survival, but for the very future of humanity. Voss, she said, her voice more forceful than before. We have to sever the connection. This thing, it's like a parasite, feeding on everything around it. We can't just shut it off. We need to stop it from reaching out any further. Voss nodded grimly, moving to assist the crew in stabilizing the ship. The battle outside was far from over, and as Ilara worked feverishly to initiate the emergency override, she could feel the faint tremor of distant explosions rocking the ship. Done, the technician said with a nod of relief. We've isolated the artifact from the ship's systems. It should stop drawing power from us, for now. But Ilara wasn't convinced. She stared at the artifact, her thoughts racing. The power was still growing. They had managed to stop it from draining the ship's energy, but the artifact's connection to the surrounding stars was still intact. This is just the beginning, she whispered. Voss turned sharply. What do you mean? Ilara, we've barely scratched the surface of what this thing can do. The catalyst, it's not just a weapon, it's a force of nature, and if we're going to survive, we need to understand it. Before it understands us. Before Voss could respond, the ship lurched violently, a loud bang reverberating through the hull as another massive explosion rang out from the Xenon fleet. But this time, it wasn't just the warships attacking. It was something else, something more. From the wreckage of the Xenon fleet, a massive shadow emerged, a colossal warship, far larger than anything Ilara had ever seen. Its silhouette loomed in the distance, its hull gleaming darkly in the void, a final act of defiance from the Dominion. The warship was heading straight for them, a tidal wave of destruction that would finish the job. Brace for impact, Voss shouted as he pushed Ilara toward the safety restraints. But Ilara wasn't looking at the warship anymore. She was staring at the artifact, a new understanding dawning on her. The revolution was far from over. The massive Xenon warship loomed ever closer, its engines cutting through space with terrifying precision. It was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of the Xenon Dominion's power, their final response to humanity's defiance. The sheer size of the vessel dwarfed their own ship, casting an imposing shadow across the debris-filled expanse. It was impossible to avoid. They were already in its direct path. Ilara's breath hitched as the ship rumbled beneath her feet, the force of the approaching warship's weapon systems sending shockwaves through the hull. The control panels flickered, warning lights flashing red across the screen. The crew scrambled, but their efforts seemed futile. They were too far from any viable escape route. General, Ilara shouted, her voice strained as she gripped the console. We can't outrun it, and we're still losing power. We need to fight back, now. Voss, ever the soldier, gave her a grim nod. We're not running, we're fighting. He turned to the crew, issuing quick, clipped commands. Prepare all available weapon systems. Target the Xenon warship's weak points. Full barrage. The crew worked quickly, setting up the remaining operational weapons, but Ilara knew that they couldn't win this fight with sheer firepower. Their systems were too damaged, and the Xenon warship was far superior in terms of weaponry and sheer size. But there was something else, something more that she could feel pulsing inside her, something the artifact had unlocked. The artifact had given them an advantage, a force unlike anything humanity had ever seen. But controlling it wasn't just about tapping into its power, it was about understanding its true potential. Alara's thoughts raced as she looked at the artifact, now glowing steadily in its containment module. It seemed almost alive, pulsing in rhythm with her heart, as though it was aware of the incoming threat and eager to do something about it. The power she had tapped into before had been overwhelming, but now she felt an eerie calm. The artifact was ready, and so was she. "We need to take this to the next level," Alara muttered to herself. She turned to Voss, determination in her voice. "There's another way to use the artifact's power, something the Xenon won't expect, but I'll need your help." Voss looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "What are you thinking?" She stepped closer to the containment module. "We can't just use it like a weapon. We need to amplify its power, direct it through our ship's systems, and focus it on a single point, directly into the core of the Xenon warship. It'll be a concentrated blast. If we time it right, it could breach their shields, maybe even destroy the ship." He glanced at the chaotic battlefield, the overwhelming force of the Xenon fleet threatening to overwhelm them at any moment. "And if we fail?" Alara didn't flinch. "We don't have a choice." Voss nodded, his jaw set in grim determination. "All right, let's do it." The crew worked feverishly, linking the artifact's power into the ship's core systems. Alara's fingers danced over the controls, coordinating with the technicians who were nervously aligning the ship's remaining energy sources. Time was running out, and the Xenon warship was closing in with terrifying speed. Outside, the warship unleashed another barrage of fire, a wave of destruction that nearly ripped their ship apart. Alara gritted her teeth, pushing herself harder, her mind focused entirely on the task at hand. Every part of her screamed with the artifact's power, its energy thrumming through her veins, urging her to release it. To let it go. "Target lock in 10 seconds, came a voice over the comms. The ship's AI, still functional, had adjusted its targeting systems to match the incoming threat. All systems primed. Alara nodded, feeling the artifact's energy coiling around her, a beast waiting to be released. The Xenon warship was almost within range. She could see its massive guns charging, preparing to fire the final killing blow. The countdown began. "Now," Alara said, her voice low and steady. In that moment, everything fell silent. The ship, the crew, the battle, all faded into the background as Alara channeled every ounce of her focus into the artifact. She felt the power surge through her, like a tidal wave ready to crash against the shore. The artifact responded to her touch, its glow brighter than ever, swirling into the ship's core and amplifying its energy 1,000-fold. The entire ship seemed to hum with the power of the catalyst, the air thick with its potential. "Fire," Alara commanded, her voice unwavering. The ship's weapon systems activated, and a brilliant beam of energy shot out from the ship's core, guided by the artifact's power. It was a concentrated blast, pure, raw force, that tore through space, faster than light itself, aimed directly at the Xenon warship's heart. The impact was devastating. The Xenon warship's shields flared under the blast, but they couldn't hold. The energy tore through them like paper, and in an instant, the warship's hull buckled, crumpled under the intensity of the blast. A blinding explosion erupted in space, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The warship's massive form disintegrated in a fiery burst, its remains scattering into the vacuum. Alara exhaled, her breath heavy as she staggered back from the console. She felt drained, exhausted, but there was no time to rest. The victory was temporary, and the battle was far from over. The Xenon Dominion would not fall so easily. "We've taken down the flagship," Voss said, his voice tight with disbelief. "But the rest of the fleet is still out there." Alara nodded, her gaze fixed on the remnants of the massive warship floating in space. "We've only just begun." The revolution had ignited, and now humanity would finish what it had started. The remnants of the Xenon warship floated in space like a broken titan, its massive frame shattered into jagged chunks, scattering across the battlefield. The silence that followed the explosion was deafening, yet for the first time since the invasion began, there was a glimmer of hope. The Xenon fleet, stunned by the loss of their flagship, faltered for a brief moment, uncertainty spreading through their ranks. Ilara's heart pounded as she stumbled back to her feet, still feeling the pulse of the artifact within her. The energy, raw and unfathomable, had surged through her veins, leaving her drained but resolute. Voss, standing beside her, was equally breathless, but there was a fire in his eyes. "We did it," he muttered, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "We actually did it." But Ilara knew better. "It's not over," she said, her tone sharp. "We've crippled their flagship, but the Xenon fleet is still here. They'll regroup, and we're running on borrowed time." The battle had shifted in their favor for now, but the Xenon Dominion would not let this humiliation slide. Their forces were still formidable, and their thirst for retribution would be unrelenting. Ilara could already sense their next move, their desperation to reclaim their lost power. The comms crackled to life. A familiar voice, one that had been silent for far too long, broke through the static. "Ilara, it's Colonel Rowan. We're receiving distress signals from the surrounding colonies. They're still under heavy attack." Ilara's stomach dropped. The Xenon had already set their sights on Earth's allies, planets and colonies that had been slowly, strategically liberated from the Dominion's iron grip. The battle for Earth had been the tipping point, and now the Xenon were retaliating. "Colonel, we can't leave them to fend for themselves," Ilara said urgently. "We've taken down their flagship, but we need reinforcements. We can't fight this battle alone." "Understood," Rowan replied, his voice steely with determination. "We've been preparing for this. We'll send a fleet to reinforce your position, but you need to hold your ground until then." Ilara glanced at Voss, who nodded. The mission had just escalated from surviving to saving everything they had worked for. She turned back to the crew. "We're not done yet. Prepare for counteroffensive. We'll make sure the Xenon regret ever stepping foot in our system." The ship, battered and bruised, shuddered as it maneuvered into position. Their weapon systems, though damaged, were still functional enough to put up a fight. The Xenon fleet, though fractured, had not retreated. Instead, they were reorganizing, preparing for a final push to crush humanity's resolve. Ilara closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the artifact's power coursing through her again, its potential limitless. If she could harness it, guide it, direct it more precisely, they could turn the tide of the war entirely. But the artifact was still a mystery, its full capabilities unknown, its risks even greater than its rewards. She had seen what it could do. The blast that destroyed the Xenon flagship was proof enough of its power, but she couldn't help but wonder, what more could it give? What price would they have to pay for using it again? "Ready the weapons," Voss ordered. "Target the nearest Xenon vessel. We'll give them a taste of what Earth can do." Ilara snapped out of her reverie, shaking her head as the gravity of their situation hit her again. They were outnumbered. The Xenon fleet was relentless, and their forces were still significant. The battle for Earth had only been the opening salvo, and now humanity would have to prove it wasn't just a defense. It was a revolution. The Xenon fleet reformed into a massive formation, their ships aligning in a deadly web of destruction. They had sent their best and brightest after Earth, and now they were looking for blood. They were prepared to finish what they had started. Ilara took a deep breath, her mind sharp with resolve. She could feel the weight of the artifact's power once more, thrumming beneath her skin, ready to be unleashed. The only question now was how far she was willing to push it. "Fire at will," she said, her voice steady despite the tension coursing through her. The crew responded instantly, unleashing everything they had left. The ship's remaining weapons discharged with a thunderous roar, energy beams cutting through the dark void, colliding with xenon shields. But the Xenon weren't the only ones with powerful weapons. Their retaliatory fire came in a torrent, bombs of destruction raining down from their ships. The force of their blasts sent shockwaves through the ship's hull, rattling Alara and the crew with the intensity of the assault. But Alara didn't flinch. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The Xenon had underestimated humanity's will to survive, to fight back against impossible odds, and now they would pay the price. With a deep, steadying breath, Alara turned back to the artifact. Let's finish this. And with that, humanity's final push began. The final battle was upon them, a fury of weapons fire and destruction that lit up the cold expanse of space. Xenon warships, once an unstoppable force, now found themselves fighting for survival. The human fleet, battered but unyielding, pushed forward with the full force of Earth's wrath, guided by Alara's steady hand and the unimaginable power of the artifact. Alara stood at the command console, her heart racing, every fiber of her being focused on the task at hand. The Xenon fleet was vast, but now they had no flagship, no unified command. Every strike, every move, was a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of their crumbling empire. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. "Colonel Rowan's fleet is here," Voss reported, his voice filled with relief. "We've got reinforcements." Alara's eyes flicked to the tactical display, and a surge of hope rushed through her. Rows of human warships, newly minted and battle-hardened, arrived at the fray, forming a protective line around their position. Their presence was a lifeline, tipping the scales in humanity's favor. The Xenon, seeing the reinforcements and the overwhelming might of Earth's forces, hesitated for a moment. But hesitation would not save them. Alara could feel the artifact's energy, pulsing with greater intensity than ever before, ready to turn the tide completely. "We're outnumbered, but we have something they don't," Alara said, turning to Voss. "We have the power to end this. Now's the time to unleash it." Voss gave a sharp nod, his gaze meeting hers. "Make it count." Alara reached for the artifact's control interface, her fingers trembling with both fear and exhilaration. The artifact had been their salvation in the face of annihilation, but now its full power could change the course of history. The Xenon thought they could crush humanity. They thought they could extinguish the flame of rebellion. But they hadn't counted on Earth's greatest weapon, unity. With a single command, the artifact responded. A beam of radiant energy shot out from the ship's core, a blinding pulse of raw power that screamed through the void, racing toward the heart of the Xenon fleet. It was no longer just a weapon. It was a catalyst, an awakening, a declaration that humanity would never be silenced. The energy surged forward with terrifying precision, striking through the Xenon's defensive shields and blasting through their ships with unrelenting force. The light of the blast illuminated the battlefield, a cosmic sun rising amidst the chaos. Xenon ships exploded in a series of violent detonations, their hulks ripped apart by the sheer force of the attack. The remaining fleet scattered, their commanders scrambling in vain to regroup. But it was too late. One by one, the Xenon ships fell, their shields failing, their power systems overloaded by the intensity of the artifact's energy. The human fleet pressed on, exploiting every opening left in the wake of the destructive wave. The Xenon were broken, their once unstoppable forces shattered beyond repair. Alara watched in silence, her pulse pounding in her ears. The artifact's power was fading, its energy spent, but the damage it had caused was irreversible. The Xenon were no longer a threat, not to Earth, not to humanity. The war was over. As the final Xenon ships were destroyed or driven into retreat, a profound silence filled the command deck. It was the silence of victory, the silence that followed the storm. Alara could barely process it, the weight of what they had just achieved sinking in. "We did it," Voss said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he couldn't quite believe the words himself. Alara nodded, her chest tight with emotion. humanity did it. Around them, the crew began to cheer, but Alara remained still, her mind racing. The artifact had given them the victory, but at what cost? What consequences would the full use of its power have? She didn't know, but for now, it didn't matter. They had won. They had secured Earth's future. Suddenly, the comms came to life again. Alara, Rowan's voice crackled through. It's over. The Seamen are retreating. Earth's colonies are safe. You've done it. A surge of relief washed over Alara, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to smile. Thank you, Colonel. We couldn't have done it without you. The screen behind her flickered, showing images of the colonies, burned, scared, but still standing. Earth's allies, its people, were safe, and now humanity could rebuild. For the first time in centuries, the stars were no longer a place of fear, but a frontier of endless possibility. We've won, Alara said softly, looking out into the vast expanse of space. But this is just the beginning. Voss stepped beside her, his hand resting on the console. What happens now? Alara glanced at the stars, her eyes filled with determination. Now we reclaim what was lost. Now we lead the galaxy into a new era. Humanity's revolution isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving, and we will. The battle was over, but the story of humanity's rise had just begun. With Earth at the forefront, they would ignite a new age of exploration, unity, and prosperity across the stars. The Crimson Catalyst had sparked the revolution. Now, humanity would light the way.